And Eric is going to spotlight us, right? So there's only one of us on the screen at a time.
That's what he did last time.
Okay,
We're live.
we're live. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association webinar. My name is Susan Shelley. I'm the Vice President of Communications of the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, the most influential taxpayer advocacy group in California. And you can be a member of this great organization. Just when we're done with this, go to hjta.org and click join. And for just $15 a year, you will strengthen the voice of taxpayers in California. You'll get Taxing Times, our newspaper, 3 times a year, filled with taxpayer-friendly information. And you can ask questions at this webinar in the comments on YouTube, in the comments on Facebook. If you're watching at taxpayerwebinar.com and you'd like to comment, just click the video and it will take you through to YouTube, and you can comment right there, and we'll be answering your questions as we go and also at the end. So I want to introduce our great team that you're going to be hearing from today. You'll be hearing from Director of Legal Affairs, Laura Dougherty, and you'll be hearing from Legislative Director, Scott Kaufman. And right now, it is my pleasure to introduce the President of HJTA, John Kupal.
Thank you, Susan. Thanks for everybody for joining. We bring these webinars to you periodically to let you know what we're doing, and we're doing a lot. 2024 is going to be perhaps the most challenging year that taxpayers have faced since Proposition 13 in 1978. And one of the things we want to talk about today and we want to focus on is the importance of the 2/3 vote. You will see the 2/3 vote requirement applied in many contexts. We hear a lot that the 2/3 vote is somehow inherently undemocratic and has no place in the constitutional requirement. So I think we have to start with, let's look at the constitutional history of the 2/3 vote, starting with the United States Constitution. The US Constitution requires a 2/3 vote of many actions in the Senate, for example, for a treaty or an impeachment, and then there are several other examples where a 2/3 vote is required. Why do we have a 2/3 vote? It is because we want certain actions, important actions, subjected to a higher degree of consensus than just simple majority. And the California Constitution follows this tradition. And in fact, the original Constitution of 1849 had a requirement, still does, of a 2/3 vote for local general obligation bonds. And so that's been a requirement for well over 100 years. So again, the 2/3 vote is required when we want higher degrees of consensus. Because of that, when Howard Jarvis proposed Proposition 13 in 1978, first and foremost, he did want to control property taxes. But he realized that if we just limit property taxes, then government would do end arounds and impose all kinds of other taxes with a simple majority vote, eroding all the taxpayer protections of the property tax reduction. So that is why he put in, directly in Proposition 13, a 2/3 vote requirement for special taxes. Now, the 2/3 vote requirement for special taxes was on top of the already existing 2/3 vote for general obligation bonds at the local level. So the 2/3 vote has been there for a long time, and we also incorporated it into Proposition 218, the Right to Vote on Taxes Act. One of the things that we had to do with the Right to Vote on Taxes Act is we had to close some of the loopholes in Proposition 13, many of which related to the 2/3 vote. For example, there was a requirement that the intent was to subject all of the taxes, local taxes, to a 2/3 vote, but because of very hostile California Supreme Court decisions, that 2/3 vote was eroded in many respects. So in Proposition 218, again, 1996, that was a Jarvis-supported initiative. We reinforced the 2/3 vote for local special taxes. Another provision that Proposition 13 did, not relating to local taxes, but to state taxes, said that any statewide tax had to receive a vote, a 2/3 vote of each house of the legislature. Since 1978, that 2/3 vote of the state legislature has been a pretty good effective break against higher taxes. However, in recent years, the California legislature has become very much more progressive, and they've actually jammed through a statewide tax that we're all familiar with, and that's the gas tax. The gas tax that is so unpopular today was jammed through with a 2/3 vote of each house of the legislature. So one of the things that we're going to be talking about later on is the Taxpayer Protection Act and how we address that issue. But the 2/3 vote, we are litigating a number of these issues, and I'm going to turn it over now to Laura Dougherty, who's going to talk about some of the cases and how they relate to the 2/3 vote. Laura?
Okay. Thanks, John. Yes, my name's Laura Dougherty. I'm the Director of Legal Affairs. Thank you for being here tonight. The main case I am going to talk about is the case against the Taxpayer Protection Act itself, but I'll give a little background first as to how we got here with the 2/3 vote issue. Just to piggyback on what John was saying, I mean, the 2/3 vote, I believe, has been characterized in the cases, I think it was Justice Richardson who said it's nothing novel. And just those two words, I think that summarizes the fact that the 2/3 vote, any 2/3 voting on all sorts of things, is just a very good idea that we have had for a very long time. We've used it for bonds, and we use it ever since 1978. We've been using it on local special taxes. So a special tax, just for a quick review, is any tax that is dedicated to a special purpose. And like John said, it's a good idea to have that consensus at a 2/3 level, because when you're dedicating tax money to a specific purpose, you're consuming some bandwidth of taxation for something in particular. You're earmarking that money. So it's a very positive thing to have more consensus on that. It's perfectly logical. It is not some anti-democratic concept, as it can be criticized. So the Taxpayer Protection Act is, well, it doesn't have a number yet, but it should be, it will follow in the path of Prop 13, Prop 218, Prop 26. It is the next Taxpayer Protection Act. It closes a lot of loopholes, and that 2/3 vote is one of them that needs to be closed. What happened starting in 2017 with the infamous Upland decision is that there has come to be an interpretation that local special taxes do not need that 2/3 vote. They only need a simple majority if they are proposed through the initiative process, instead of being put on the ballot by your city council or your board of supervisors. This really just upends voter intent. It's not consistent at all with the letter or spirit of Prop 13 and Prop 218, both of which enshrined the 2/3 vote into the Constitution. It's been very unfortunate and very difficult over these past few years. The first appellate court decision that officially declared that only a simple majority is necessary for a local special tax occurred in 2020. So it's only been a few years, but even now, as we have the Taxpayer Protection Act qualified, there is criticism that we are suddenly taking away funding from local governments, when really we're just restoring voter intent to put that 2/3 threshold on all special taxes. So that's what's going on. I just want to share that for some perspective. Where the TPA, one of its key features is trying to restore that 2/3 vote and clarify that the 2/3 vote has always applied to all local special taxes. It really doesn't matter how you get it on the ballot. A tax is a tax, right? And even in the Upland decision that started all of this confusion, there were two dissenting justices who said, look, the voters knew what they wanted here. This is just strange. So we've had this problem going on since 2017, and primarily since 2020, when 2 district courts of appeal started to say, well, only simple majority is necessary. So this has changed things in local governments, and it needs to be fixed. So what's happening with the Taxpayer Protection Act? Last fall, the governor and the legislature filed suit against it. What they are doing with that lawsuit is saying that the TPA should be taken off the ballot, meaning you should not have any chance to vote on it at all. This is very wrong. This is like not having a chance to vote on Prop 13 or a chance to vote on Prop 218. So the big question is probably this: how can the governor and the legislature possibly say that you should not have a chance to vote on it? Because that's what they're doing in the Supreme Court right now. They're saying, we want you to cancel this, take it off the ballot. The voters should not even have a chance to vote on it. And by the way, the case is pending, and we don't have any court dates at the moment. It is fully briefed. We know that something must happen by June 27th. That is the only date I can give you if you want to watch for what's happening. And the reason June 27th is the critical date here is because that's when the Secretary of State has to formally place this on the ballot. That's the date she needs to know what we're doing here. So that's all I can tell you as far as dates and what's happening in the litigation. But here's how they're characterizing it. Here's how the governor is claiming that you shouldn't have the right to vote on the Taxpayer Protection Act. What the governor and the legislature must argue in order to prevent you from voting is that the Taxpayer Protection Act is what is known as a revision versus an amendment. So what is a revision and what is an amendment? A revision of the Constitution is basically like a rewrite, a redesign of the whole thing. It's actually very, very rare. But the reason they have to argue that it's a revision is because the people are not allowed to revise the Constitution. So through your statewide power of initiative, you can amend the Constitution, and that happens all the time. And the legislature can propose amendments too. But the people cannot revise the Constitution. Only the legislature can propose revisions to the Constitution. So they have to make this argument that the Taxpayer Protection Act is a revision. So how are they arguing that we're revising the Constitution instead of amending it? Well, we think it's a very weak argument. I mean, for one thing, Prop 13 was challenged on the same basis, and the Supreme Court decided just after 1978 that that was not a revision, that was an amendment. So we've had a series of Taxpayer Protection Acts. This is a new one. It should fall in the same camp. But they have two arguments. I'll run them by you, and then I'm going to pass to Scott to hear more about more things the legislature's up to. But if you want to know, here I go into the details. The first argument the governor essentially makes for why this is a revision is that the government, well, it's a fear-based argument. The government won't be able to handle emergencies. They're saying if the voters can approve statewide taxes, and if we restore this 2/3 vote to the local taxes, then, what do we do when there's an emergency? What do we do when there's another healthcare emergency? What do we do when there's another earthquake? And of course, this invited a lot of amicus briefs to say, oh, yes, we need to be sure we have funding. And no one disagrees with that. No one disagrees that we need funding for so many important things in our state. But the truth is that emergency taxes have very rarely been used. And we have moved from a system of reactive emergency planning into proactive emergency planning. So there really isn't anything to worry about there. If you're hearing any of this, I just want to reassure you that we don't have a problem with emergency funding. The main event that I think that's cited in the briefing is the 1989 earthquake. There was an emergency tax passed that was projected. I don't know how much it actually raised, but there was an emergency tax passed projected to raise $785 million. Now that's about $2 billion today. But guess what we've done since 1989? We have changed our emergency planning from a reactive to a proactive approach. And we now have 4 accounts, and there could be more, that are rainy day funds. So we have already planned for this. We have a budget stabilization account that has about $22 billion in it. We have a public school stabilization account that has $8.5 billion in it. We have a safety net reserve that protects CalWORKs and Medi-Cal specifically. That has about $900 million in it. We have a special fund for economic uncertainties, and that's a great name. I like that one. That's another all-purpose fund that has $3.8 billion in it. So if I add that all up, you know, that's roughly what, $35 billion that we have in reserves. If you compare that to the one example of maybe raising $2 billion in today's dollars from that earthquake, we're obviously fine. Not to mention the fact that if the legislature really wanted to propose an emergency tax, the voters would probably approve it. You know, there are so many options. In other words, the fear argument should not work. It's very weak. We are in a good position. Even the governor himself in the budget said that the state's ability to withstand an economic downturn is stronger than ever. So this emergency tax argument, we need the legislature to have power to pass taxes right now, like the gas tax that John talked about. You know, it just doesn't fly very well. It's pretty weak. The second argument for why the Taxpayer Protection Act would be a revision that the people are not allowed to vote on is impracticality. The governor and the legislature are saying that the TPA is just kind of creating dysfunction, making it too difficult for government to manage. This is an odd one because they're essentially saying that if you put, and they've literally said this too, that if you combine Prop 13, 218, 26, and now the TPA, it just becomes too much to handle. I'm really not sure how the Supreme Court is going to respond to this. They can't reevaluate previous propositions, especially when they've already determined that Prop 13 is an amendment, not a revision. They can't be looking at other things that have affected the government's budget. You know, there's Prop 98, education funding guarantees, right? We don't want to open that. There would be so much that would have to be opened up if we're just going to look at the accumulative effect of putting all these things together. And if we were to cancel the TPA on this basis, then that would draw a line right now that would prevent future constitutional amendments from being legitimate as well. It would be very odd to say, okay, we're all done. We cannot amend the Constitution anymore because at this point it's a revision. So this, I know I'm going in circles a little bit here, but it's just such an odd argument. It's basically the governor asking the Supreme Court to take their word for it that this is just going to be too hard. There's no legal authority for it, and that's what makes it a really weak argument. So again, I can't say what the Supreme Court is going to do. We're waiting to see. It is possible that they will just deny the petition without saying anything. They might give us no analysis whatsoever, and that would be fine. Then we carry on. We don't have to worry about it. My prediction is that they will hold a hearing so that voices can be heard, argument can be held and fleshed out, but then they will deny the petition. That's my prediction. I don't know. We'll see what they do. I think I'm ready to hand this over to Scott unless there are any questions about the Taxpayer Protection Act lawsuit.
Nothing so far.
I am available as well. I know a lot of people are concerned about Measure ULA. I'll be available for questions on that if we have time later as well. So I'm going to pass off to Scott to talk more about the legislature and what they've been doing.
Well, I think the quote is that no man's life, liberty, or property are safe while the legislature is in session. That's always true when the California legislature is in session. This session, though different than last session, but last session is really what we're talking about because that's the one where a number of bills that are very concerning that you may see on the November ballot that affect the 2/3 passed. The one I'm talking about is Assembly Constitutional Amendment 1. The nuts and bolts of it is I don't think a lot of people realize that Prop 13 did more than the property tax cap. Everyone thinks of Prop 13 as the 1% cap, 1% on purchase price. Your property taxes are 1% of purchase price. They can't go up more than 2% a year. That versus the arbitrary vagaries of market-based property taxation that exists in other states. But it did more than that. It also created a 2/3 vote requirement for the state legislature to put taxes on the ballot before it was a simple majority. And it also created a 2/3 vote requirement for local special taxes. And that third plank, the local special taxes, is the one we're talking about. As Laura mentioned, there has been a sustained attack in the courts against the 2/3. They had I would say, a wrongly decided decision in the Upland case that allows citizen special initiatives to only pass with a simple majority vote. But now the legislature is going after the other side of it on government 2/3 vote requirements for special taxes. And that's what ACA 1 does. ACA 1 lowers the voter threshold from 2/3 to 55% for special taxes for infrastructure. And this is the Joe Biden definition of infrastructure. It is everything. The list is long, and it is, there's this list of specific projects that includes, and then it ends with, but not limited to. So it could be more than that. It's open to interpretation what this is. Even a state senator on the floor of the state Senate, she's Democrat, ended up voting for the bill. But even she called it incredibly broad, the scope of this bill. So we're really concerned about it because we think this, combined with that bad Upland decision, is going to largely obliterate the 2/3 vote requirement as we know it. So that's going to be on the ballot. It's ACA 1. We don't have a proposition number yet, but when we do, you will be hearing about it a lot, and we hope that everyone votes no on it because we think it's going to be terrible. We've got a lot going on the ballot this year. Obviously ACA 1 we mentioned. Laura mentioned TPA, which will hopefully, God willing, if the Supreme Court will allow it to stay on the ballot, will be on the ballot. And then we also have ACA 13, which, Susan, I believe you're speaking about ACA 13. Are you not? You're muted, Susan. So I need you to unmute because I basically said I feel all that I need to. It's pretty. I mean, ACA 1 is pretty straightforward. They're gutting the 2/3. They already did. They already did on the citizen side. Now they're going to try and do it on the government side. And then ACA 13 is going to make it so if we ever want to restore the 2/3, we're never going to be able to do it. Tell them more, Susan.
Exactly. What you're going to see on your ballot this November is something that makes it easier to raise your taxes and harder to do anything about it. And the harder to do anything about it section of your ballot will be ACA 13. And once again, we don't have a proposition number, but we will, and you'll hear about it. So here's the story with this. Since 1849, since we had a handwritten constitution, since before California was admitted to the Union, all constitutional amendments have needed a simple majority vote of the people to pass. Until now. ACA 13 creates a definition of a particular type of constitutional amendment that needs more than a simple majority. And you'll be shocked to hear this, but by an amazing coincidence, they exactly described the Taxpayer Protection Act. Here's how this is going to work. If it's an initiative from the people and it creates a supermajority to raise taxes or to do anything else, then it must get that same supermajority in order to pass on the ballot itself, which means that if ACA 13 was passed by voters with, by the way, a simple majority, 50% plus one in November, then the Taxpayer Protection Act on the same ballot would not pass with 50% plus one, as it should, as it would have, as everything has since 1849. No, the Taxpayer Protection Act would need a 2/3 vote to pass. That is a poison pill. It's very difficult to get a statewide 2/3. Even Proposition 13 itself was a little bit shy of 2/3. And that's the point. They don't ever want to see a Prop 13 again. They are opposed to taxpayer protection, and they are opposed to government accountability. And they're doing every trick in the book and a few new ones that they wrote just for this. ACA 13 and this ridiculous lawsuit where the governor and the legislature are suing the taxpayers. More than 1 million people signed petitions to put the Taxpayer Protection Act on the ballot. More than 1 million people, California voters, under the 1911 initiative process. 1911, that's how long we've been doing this. And it's always been the same. And they have changed it just for this. We're a little ticked off about it. They're suing to have it taken off the ballot. They're trying to do a poison pill on the ballot. And speaking of poison pills on the ballot, ACA 1, if it passes in November, would immediately take effect regarding everything on the ballot at the same time. So every tax increase on your ballot all across the state, in every local jurisdiction where there's a tax increase that would require a 2/3 vote, if ACA 1 passes, it would pass with 55% instead. So you'll have your ballot booklet right in your hand and it'll say needs a 2/3 vote, but it won't. It'll pass with 55%. And your taxes, if ACA 1 passes, your taxes will go up after every election. And it won't take long before people are being taxed out of their houses. We cannot allow this to happen. So we are going to be explaining this all summer long, all into the fall, right up until Election Day in November. You have 3 things, assuming that we prevail in the Supreme Court and the Taxpayer Protection Act stays on the ballot. It's going to be yes on that, no on ACA 1, no on ACA 13. We will get that message out all across the state of California with everything we've got. And if you want to help, you can go to hjta.org and click Join Us and be a member of this organization. And you can also donate directly to the campaign to protect taxpayers on these 3 measures that are on the ballot. That's our Protect Prop 13 committee. And if you click the donate button at hjta.org, you'll see the link to donate directly to the committee. Because if you didn't know, there's a lot of really strict rules about what money can be used for what purpose. So we have the association that runs the whole operation of HJTA. Then we have a foundation. Those are tax deductible contributions, or they may be, depending on your tax situation. Ask your tax preparer. But that's a 501c3. That does our legal and educational work. Then we have our campaign committees, organized under California law, not under the IRS code, but specifically California election law. And those can do commercials, yard signs, any kind of campaign work at all. Those dollars have to be completely segregated from the association and the foundation. Everything is separate. So this is why we're so careful with our fundraising. And when you're on our mailing list and you get our mail, you'll see this is for the campaign committee for PP13, Protect Prop 13. This is for the association. This is for the foundation. We have to do them separately. It's very complicated, but we're very good at it. So you can join the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association and cover all your bases as a taxpayer. You'll be protecting yourself in the courts, in the legislature, on the ballot. You'll have somebody advocating for you in the media. Now, we'll work for you anyway. But if you join, you make us stronger. And it's very helpful. I want to put in a plug for our new radio show. Every Friday night, John and I will be taking your questions live on the radio on 790 KABC in Southern California, on 560 KSFO in Northern California. You can pick it up anywhere in between, all the way down to San Diego, all the way up to Lake Tahoe. Or you can listen on your mobile device or your laptop. You can listen at ksfo.com and kabc.com. We're streaming live. And if you miss it live, you can catch it as a podcast. Go to our website, hjta.org, and you'll see it right there on the homepage. Just click the button and you can listen to it live. If you're not familiar with podcasts, I'm a little slow on the technology. I don't keep up with all of it. You can it's just a recording. A podcast is just a recording. Just click the button and you can listen to it, or download it and listen to it later. And that's my update. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat on YouTube, comment on Facebook or YouTube. You can email us. I'm Susan at hjta.org. I'll take your questions by email, Susan at hjta.org. And I want to make sure that we go through the particular points of the Taxpayer Protection Act so everybody knows why this is so important. You can also go to Right to Vote on Taxes, righttovoteontaxes.com. That's our website for the Taxpayer Protection Act. You can download a fact sheet, a flyer on that. And let's go through it, John. Let's talk just a little bit about what's in it. Let's talk about first the change that it makes to how state taxes are passed. What is the protection in the Taxpayer Protection Act on state taxes?
Well, it's very important. As I mentioned earlier, the 2/3 vote requirement applied to the legislature provided adequate protection for many, many years. But it's only been recently that a lot of taxes are passed, not just the gas tax, but other taxes, more minor taxes are passed easily with a 2/3 vote of each house. And so that 2/3 vote protection has been weakened substantially. So the Taxpayer Protection Act adds the requirement that in addition to the 2/3 vote of each house, it has to receive a majority vote of the statewide electorate. So imagine this. Can you imagine if the gas tax, after having been passed by the legislature, were put before the voters? I don't think it would have gotten even majority vote, let alone, or any kind of vote, let alone some sort of passage. So the Taxpayer Protection Act would not submit those state taxes to a supermajority, but it would just say the voters will have the final say. That aspect of the Taxpayer Protection Act is extraordinarily popular. When we did polling on it, it polled close to 90%, north of 80%. So the idea that at the state level, we can say yay or nay to a state tax is very, very potent protection.
The governor doesn't care for it. The legislature.
The governor does not care for it at all, because it's a restraint on the politicians in Sacramento being able to raise taxes whenever they want.
Well, we're going to try to do something about that. And one of the most frequently asked questions that I get is about transparency and how these things are labeled on the ballot. People complain to me, we don't know if yes means no or no means yes, or up is down, or what's a tax increase. Explain how the Taxpayer Protection Act would increase ballot transparency.
Well, how many times have we looked at something on the ballot that it was not clear what from the ballot label what this particular proposal was? This particularly is egregious at the local level when you see some sort of initiative that said provides sufficient funding for critical programs in fire or police or some other thing. And they never mention the T word, the tax word. Now, we've seen this over and over again, where tax increases or fee increases are labeled with language that does not identify it clearly as a tax or fee increase. So this is one provision, an accountability and transparency provision in the Taxpayer Protection Act, and that is, if it raises a tax, it has to say so on the label that you look at on your ballot or in the voting booth. So that's very important. And, you know, they don't like that because they don't want voters to know what these proposals really do. So I think it's in everybody's best interest to know exactly what you're voting on, because how many times have we seen it? People ask us, well, how did that thing pass? I mean, if you look at things like the high-speed rail project, how did that pass? Or things like Proposition 19, how did that pass? Well, it passed because of a lot of deception. So we're trying to remove a lot of the deception in how tax measures are presented to the voters.
And we're going to talk about Proposition 19 in a couple of minutes, but first I wanted to cover the part of the TPA that covers fees, because currently the legislature will pass some target in legislation for something that they want to accomplish, and they'll hand it off to a bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy says, well, the only way we can do this is to have a fee. And then everybody says it's not our fault. The legislature says they didn't do it. The bureaucrats said they had to do it. It's nobody's held accountable. So what would the new system be under the Taxpayer Protection Act?
Well, quite simply, it would prevent the taxing power to be delegated to some unelected bureaucrat. We've often thought that, look, legislators, if you want to vote for a tax, you need to cast a vote for that. And so it makes it easy for voters to determine who is really responsible for increasing their taxes. So right now, as Susan just said, many times a regulatory scheme is set up that gives some administrative agency broad discretion in pursuing additional revenue. So what the Taxpayer Protection Act says is that the taxing power cannot be delegated to someone who is not elected. In other words, this means that city councils, boards of supervisors, and the legislature itself must cast a vote on tax increases and not delegate it to some obscure administrative agency, which, by the way, some of these local administrative agencies cover broad regional areas, and you never know who's responsible. Take the South Coast Air Quality Management District. Does anybody really know who's responsible for that? They really don't. So very important to provide that anti-delegation authority, and we think that will help taxpayers better understand who it is exactly raising their taxes.
So really what we're doing with the Taxpayer Protection Act is we are closing loopholes and we are taking away trickery, because there's been a lot of trickery that has been used to fool people into passing tax increases when they thought it was something else. And we're taking away several of those schemes. One of the schemes is what we like to refer to as the AB scheme, where there's something on the ballot that's a general tax, but then there's an advisory measure. And the advisory measure says, well, if this general tax passes, would you like it spent on, let's say, police or homelessness services or whatever is polling well that day? But that's totally advisory, not binding at all. So one thing the Taxpayer Protection Act does is take away that game, that trick of fooling people by putting something on the ballot that looks like it's going to be law, but actually it's public relations. And we don't think that's right. We don't think people should be tricked. And then you pass the tax, you never get the service you thought you were getting, and it's too late. It's done. You're out of luck.
Yeah.
So we fixed that in the Taxpayer Protection Act. And of course, we close that upland loophole where if something is a citizens initiative tax increase, and by the way, who's standing out in front of Costco with a clipboard to raise their own taxes? Only the people who are going to get the money do that. So if it's a citizens initiative tax increase, it's from some group that's going to get the money. And then the court decision that Laura referred to makes it 50% plus 1 instead of 2/3. And we think that's a loophole, a distortion of Proposition 13, unconstitutional, and the Taxpayer Protection Act closes that loophole. So for all these reasons, we're going to fight very hard for it.
You know, one of the things I like to follow up on that Laura mentioned about ACA 1 and Scott as well, ACA 13. I get the question a lot like, well, you know, what are your chances of actually winning? Because this is California. It's a very, very progressive state. And but what's interesting is that on many issues, California is progressive, left of center. But we have seen, especially in more recent years, that on tax and fiscal issue and things like waste, fraud, and abuse, the Public Policy Institute of California recently came out with a poll, and they asked the question to voters, do you think California wastes a lot of money, some money, or not at all? Well, the split was 45, 45, 10. 45% of Californians said the state wastes a lot of money, and 45 said some money. California does very, very poorly in the use of taxpayer dollars. And that is a perception embraced by not just Republicans, but a lot of Democrats as well, that we have high taxes in the state of California, highest income tax rate, highest state sales tax rate, highest gas tax in the nation, and yet they're always screaming for more money. So when people ask us, well, what are your chances of winning? This is such a progressive state. I would say very good. The polling that we have done on Proposition 1 indicates that it is extremely popular, which I would argue was a reason why they brought a lawsuit to take it off the ballot, because they're very scared that it will pass.
You mean TPA? You said Proposition 1, but you mean TPA.
That's right, TPA, sorry. Because I was thinking about Proposition 1 because it relates to this. We just found out that this Proposition 1 that people voted on just last week is barely hanging on. I think it's 50.2%, and it's lost ground. Now, as you recall, this is the proposition that would provide homeless support and mental health support. And it had the full weight of the governor behind it, a multi-million-dollar campaign, and really no money spent against it. Both Susan and I did a lot of earned media radio, and we did a lot of public speaking on Proposition 1. But quite frankly, I thought, given the fact that it was the governor, it was his initiative, had tons of money, he had all the special interests, the firefighters, and a lot of the special interests were in support. I thought our chances of even being close were pretty low. I was wrong. It could go down in defeat, which for purposes of TPA and ACA 1 and ACA 13 has got to scare them a little bit, because I think voters are waking up to how many times they've been fooled, and they say, look, you tax us enough, we have enough bonds out there. So I look at the tea leaves right now, and I actually like our chances, again, assuming that the California Supreme Court keeps the TPA on the ballot. And by the way, tomorrow, the official TPA campaign, of which I'm a member of the executive committee, we're launching the official campaign tomorrow. It'll be reported quite a bit in newspapers tomorrow and the next day. So watch your local media, because this is going to be a big splash. And the launching of the official campaign, and we got a long way to go to get to November, but it's going to be a hard-fought fight, but I think we're up for the challenge.
It's going to be very important for taxpayers that this succeeds. You'll be hearing from us all summer long about it. So let's just update everybody on repeal the death tax. As you know, if you get our emails, and if you don't get our emails, go to hjta.org and sign up for email alerts so that we can keep you informed. What happened with the repeal the death tax initiative that we were trying so hard to get on the November ballot is the clock ran out on us before we had enough signatures. So although we got almost 560,000 signatures on petitions to repeal the death tax, we needed 875,000 valid signatures, and we fell short on that. So what we're asking everyone to do, I know many of you are very, very concerned about this issue, more every day as people have this sad experience and get these letters with their reassessment and their tax bill. What you should do is go to repealthedeathtax.com, click the link that says sign up for updates, and put yourself on our list for mail, email, and phone calls, because we might do texts or phone calls to let you know if we're going to start it up again. We have to have enough support in advance to start it up again, because it's such a short period of time to get these petitions signed. And we're never going to have $100 million to do it. So we have to be very cautious. You know, this whole organization runs on small donations from regular taxpayers. There's no big donations from anybody. There's no special interest money, no huge checks, and certainly no government money. So we run on small donations. We take that commitment very seriously, to watch out for you and to watch out for your money when you donate to HJTA. So we're very cautious. But if we have enough support, we can look at this again. Sign up at repealthedeathtax.com. Tell everyone you know who's interested in this issue that they should sign up. We will not spam you. We will not sell your information. This is just for us. We just want to be able to contact people who are interested in a hurry if we're able to do this again. So that's where that stands. Anybody have anything they want to add to that?
I would say our big effort is pushing it in the legislature. Call your legislators and put a lot of pressure on them. And we have a number of great allies as public officials. Senator Kelly Ciarto is sponsoring our SCA 4, which would repeal the death tax. And a lot of the county assessors are very supportive of our efforts because they've been left holding the bag trying to implement Prop 19, and it's been very difficult for them. So yes, we'll continue to push.
So you can contact your legislators if you don't have their phone numbers handy or you're not sure what district you're in, because we've all been redistricted and moved around. Go to findyourrep.legislature.ca.gov. Findyourrep.legislature.ca.gov. And then you just put in your address. It will give you the names and contact information of your state senator and your state assembly representative. And call them up. Tell them you're concerned about this issue. Ask them if they are supporting SCA 4. It had one committee hearing. It was voted down, but it was granted reconsideration. So it could be brought back. And if there's enough public pressure, it will be brought back. That's what happened in 1986. That's how we got that parent-child transfer exclusion to begin with. There was enormous public pressure, and the legislature created the parent-child transfer exclusion so that people would not have their property reassessed when transferred from parent to child. So that's where it came from. The legislature created it, and they voted for it unanimously, which gives you a sense of how much public pressure there was all across the board, all across the political spectrum. They voted unanimously to put that on the ballot, and it passed with 75% of the vote. And then the fine print of Proposition 19 in 2020 repealed it. So it's gone. And we know that this is hurting a lot of people. And every week it's hurting more people. And we are very aware of it. We get the phone calls, we get the emails, we hear you. So go to repealthedeathtax.com. Even if you signed up before, sign up again. And just so you know, we are not allowed to collect the information off the petitions. So even though we have almost 560,000 people who signed it, it is illegal for us to take that information and make a mailing list out of it. We're not allowed to do that. That protects you when you sign a petition from being spammed forever for signing it. No one is allowed to use that data. So we need you to sign up again. Sorry for the inconvenience, but that's the reason. So please sign up, have all your friends sign up. Anyone who signed the petition that you gave it to them and they signed it, have them sign up and put yourself on our list to be contacted as soon as we're able to put this together again. If we're able to, we hope we can. So I want to cover Measure ULA a little bit because we have a lawsuit which is going to appeal over Measure ULA, the transfer tax in the city of Los Angeles. Laura, tell us a little bit about what that was and why we think it's invalid.
Sure, thanks, Susan. Yeah, Measure ULA is a very important case. It is another attack on Prop 13 that we are handling. It's another extension of the Upland case as well. It's taking Upland to a whole new level beyond the attempt to cancel the 2/3 vote on special taxes, because it's speaking to the very nature of the type of tax. When Prop 13 passed in 1978, it specifically banned what are called transfer taxes, and Measure ULA is a transfer tax. And what that is it's a, it's a cut of the sale when a property closes escrow. So what Measure ULA proposed and is now doing, that it was effective April 1st of last year, is that if a property in Los Angeles sells for more than $5 million, it's going to be taxed 4% of that. And if it sells for over $10 million, it will be taxed 5.5%. Now, these cuts are regardless of mortgages or other liens on property. I got a call from someone the other day who had to sell, and it was in order to get out of, just close a business. They just needed to let go of a business, and they ended up having to pay to close their business because the property was mortgaged. So, it doesn't work out well. We assume it was called a mansion tax. So it was marketed as, this is only going to affect super wealthy people. Don't worry about it if you're not super wealthy. This is how it got through. But, the legal question, of course, is, well, how did this get through if Prop 13 banned transfer taxes? It got through because of that interpretation from the Upland case of 2017, which is that maybe when there's a voter initiative, the rules of Prop 13 and 218 go out the window. And again, that was just never the voters' intent. The voters were trying to protect themselves. When you sell your house, you're not supposed to make some sort of balloon payment or postponed property tax payment to your local government. The 1% cap is supposed to be for real. It's something we should all be able to count on. So this transfer tax issue is very important to Prop 13. And we're defending it in the Measure ULA case. Now in Los Angeles, the charter is also very important. The charter actually says that an initiative must match what the city council could propose. So when we saw that, we said, okay, we can defend against this here because the charter specifically says that we Prop 13 must essentially be upheld right here in the city. It's sort of a self-protection. But unfortunately, in October, the Los Angeles court judge did decide that Measure ULA is valid. So it is ongoing, but we filed our notice of appeal right away. So we are now waiting for a briefing schedule, and we'll be at the Court of Appeal soon. There will be a decision. The real decision will probably come from the Court of Appeal. They will look at it completely new because these are very important questions of constitutional law. So it's as if we start again in front of a new set of judges. After that, there could be a petition for review to the Supreme Court, but of course the Supreme Court is just optional. They can decide not to review a case. So it could end at the Court of Appeal.
So there are really two separate problems with Measure ULA. The one that we are involved in suing over is that transfer taxes for a special purpose are unconstitutional. And the LA City Charter, which predates the 1911 initiative process statewide, says specifically that you can't enact by initiative what the city council itself is not allowed to enact. Did I explain that right?
Exactly. And that was an amendment to the Los Angeles City Charter, which shows the intentionality of Los Angeles residents to make sure that nothing could be done that the city council cannot do. Because imagine other things that could be done. What authority that the city council doesn't have could be placed into an initiative, and then the city council could skirt all sorts of other rules as well.
So they could just evade the Constitution by putting it on a petition instead of a resolution that the council is passing.
Right.
So that's why, because Prop 13 prohibits transfer taxes, and the courts have interpreted that to mean transfer taxes for a special purpose. Once again, a court decision that created more grief for taxpayers. But still, that was the standing, that was the way that it stood, that transfer taxes for a special purpose were unconstitutional. But because of this Upland decision, which, as you said, everything's out the window if it's on a petition, all your taxpayer protections evaporate if somebody stands in front of Costco with a clipboard and gets this tax increase on the ballot that way. And that just can't be sustainable, can it?
No. I mean, this is a very significant precedent if it goes the wrong way, because, like I said, they marketed this as a mansion tax. They put it on very high dollar properties. But if it becomes acceptable, then this could be done to all property owners.
In a way.
When one way someone put it to me is, they said, when I buy my house, then the government, my local government, owns 5% of it immediately. It's like having an equity share in property.
With the ULA case, we have the opportunity we have the legal attack, but also if the Taxpayer Protection Act passes, that is the secondary ability to put it before the voters again. So we have two attacks on the ULA tax. One is our lawsuit, and the other is Taxpayer Protection Act. I see we had a couple questions. We keep on referring to TPA. That's our own shorthand. We should probably avoid acronyms. So the TPA, the official name of the Taxpayer Protection Act, is the Taxpayer Protection and Government Accountability Act. So everything it does is right there in the title. So I think people like the idea of accountability and taxpayer protections. And then there was another question here about whether or not SCA 4 was retroactive. It would not result in any refunds. However, it would allow people who were caught up in Prop 19 to return to their original base value, which would be substantial protection. So Scott or Susan can correct me if I'm wrong, but it does allow anybody to go back and rely on the tax base plus 2% of what their parents gave to them. Very, very important.
Well, it is very important, but unfortunately, when SCA 4 was introduced, it did not include the same provision that we included, which was for retroactivity. So that is something that we would have to probably fight in the legislature to have put back. But Scott, is that something that we could do? I mean, it would be an open debate, and we could offer amendments through our allies in the legislature, could we not?
It's certainly something that could be added. I think the reason I can't remember the reason it was taken out off the top of my head, but I do recall it was just something about the quote unquote sausage making in Sacramento, that it was going to make it easier to pass. And the thought process was simply just
I remember
getting it through.
It was which committee it went to first. That's what it was
Yes.
about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Well,
that's why we have the experts here, because but when we did the repeal of the death tax, we did have a provision that would allow you to go back and rely on the base. And if we have to try this again via initiative, we would certainly put that provision back in, because there are a lot of people who were badly hurt by that provision of Prop 19.
and many people don't realize how this affects tenants in small buildings, because every building that's owned by a family is going to be reassessed to market value when that generation passes and the building goes to their children. It'll be reassessed to market value. Well, what happens to the tenants? Either the rent goes up, or if the building's under rent control, perhaps it's no longer a viable business and it's sold, and the tenants are evicted because it's going to be torn down and turned into something else. So this affects not just homeowners, this affects small business owners, this affects tenants in apartment buildings. This is all property. It's not just beach mansions, as some of the commercials may have suggested. This is every property, every family, small, large, doesn't matter. And it's devastating, because when you reassess property to market value in California, in some of these coastal cities especially, it's insane. And you owe 1%. Proposition 13 cut the tax rate to 1%, but 1% of $1 million is $10,000 a year that you have to come up with. And in Los Angeles County, the median price of a home is about $900,000. The median price, there's as many above as below. Real estate has appreciated to crazy levels, which would be a good thing if you weren't taxed on it. And we're trying to prevent people with Prop 13 from being taxed out of their property. And unfortunately, Prop 19 is having that same effect when someone passes away, and it's very, very harsh. So we are looking at everything that can be done. Contact your legislators, let them know that you're watching this issue. And as I said earlier, sign up again for the mailing list so that we can contact you and we know how many people want the petition before we plunge in again. It's a very short time period that you're allowed to collect the signatures. So that's one of the problems. Are there more questions? I don't see any more questions. I'll plug the radio show again, Friday night at 6 o'clock. Set an alarm on your phone to tune in to 790 KABC in Southern California, 560 KSFO in Northern California, and KSFO.com or KABC.com on your phone, on your mobile device of any type, or your laptop, streaming live on the internet, and also available the recording later as a podcast on the hjta.org site.
Susan, do you mean that people can call you every Friday night and ask you questions?
Every Friday night, we are taking your calls live on the air, and we can't take it back after we say it. So we have to get it right. Live on the air for an hour every Friday night. And we're very happy to be doing it, because it's great to hear from all the taxpayers in California with their questions, with their concerns. We want to get the word out that the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association is working for you. And you can be a member for just $15 a year. You keep us strong, you keep us active, We need members. The more members we have, the faster we can do things like qualify initiatives, get everyone you know on board. HJTA.org, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, the people who brought you Proposition 13, the people who work every day to make sure you're never taxed out of your house. If we don't have any more questions, I think we can probably wrap it up. So I'd like to thank everybody. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody who's watching, for being here at the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association webinar. Thank you, Eric, behind the scenes, for making this all work. If you missed any part of this, you can see the recording on our website, taxpayerwebinar.com. You'll be able to see the recording forever at taxpayerwebinar.com, and lots of good information on the Howard Jarvis website at hjta.org. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you in a couple of months. We do this several times a year. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, good night.